The canteen caught the light first, metal glinting in the July sun like a signal mirror. Oberleutnant Klaus Hartmann watched it swing from the American's hip as the MP walked down the line of prisoners. 40 German soldiers sat in the dirt of a Normandy field, hands bound, uniforms crusted with dust and dried blood from the St. Lo pocket. The air tasted of cordite and burned rubber. Hartmann's tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth. He'd been Wehrmacht for 6 years. France, Poland, Russia. He knew what happened next. You didn't give prisoners water in the first hours. You let them bake. You established order. Sometimes you didn't give them water at all. The American MP couldn't have been more than 19. Smooth face, no stubble. He stopped at the first German in line. Gefreiter with a head wound, blood caked black across his temple. The kid unscrewed his canteen. Offered it. The Gefreiter stared. Didn't move. The American shook the canteen impatiently. Drink. His German had a strange accent. Flat vowels. It's hot. The Gefreiter's hands trembled as he took it. He drank. 3 long swallows, Adam's apple bobbing, handed it back like it might explode. The American took the canteen, put it to his own lips, drank. No hesitation. Didn't wipe the rim. Didn't grimace. Just drank from the same vessel a German had just used, then moved to the next man. Hartmann felt something crack in his chest. At Minsk, in 1941, he'd watched his unit guard Soviet prisoners in a rail yard. 200 men in a space meant for 50. They'd screamed for water. Hartmann remembered the sound. Animal sounds, not human. His company commander had laughed. Let the Untermenschen beg. When they finally got water, it came from a drainage ditch. Contaminated. 40 died from dysentery in 3 days. That was the order of things. Superior races drink clean. Inferior races beg. The American moved down the line. Same routine. Offer canteen. Wait. Watch them drink. Drink himself. Move on. He did this with every German. 37 men. 37 times he put his lips to metal that enemy lips had touched. When he reached Hartmann, the canteen was nearly empty. The kid's uniform showed corporal stripes, 29th Division patch. His eyes were blue, lighter than Hartmann's. He held out the canteen. Hartmann took it. The metal was warm from the sun and the kid's hand. He could see a dent near the cap, a scratch across the canvas cover. American manufacture. Better than anything the Wehrmacht issued now. He drank. The water tasted of metal and chemicals. Purification tablets, probably. It was the most beautiful thing he'd ever tasted. He handed it back. Watched the American's face for the tell, the moment of disgust, the flicker that said, you're still the enemy, still different, still less. He'd seen it on his own face in truck mirrors when dealing with Soviet prisoners. That involuntary recoil from contamination. The American showed nothing. Took the canteen, drank the last mouthful, screwed the cap back on, nodded once, casual, the way you'd nod to a work crew on break, and moved to the last 3 men in line. Hartmann sat in the dirt and tried to process what he'd just experienced. 6 years of training, 6 years of doctrine, the entire architecture of racial hierarchy, Herrenvolk and Untermensch, the philosophical foundation of everything the Reich stood for. It said this moment was impossible. You didn't share water with enemies. You didn't erase the line between victor and conquered. You didn't treat the defeated like they were simply other men who happened to lose. But this American teenager, who probably couldn't spell Untermensch and definitely didn't give a damn about Alfred Rosenberg's racial theories, had just done exactly that. 40 times. Without hesitation. Without theater. Like it was normal. Like they were just men. The sun beat down. Hartmann's wrists chafed against the rope. Somewhere behind the American lines, artillery rumbled. Their artillery, walking across German positions with the kind of ammunition expenditure that Wehrmacht commanders could only dream about. The Americans had shells to waste. They had everything to waste. Except prisoners, apparently. Those they watered. Another MP appeared with a truck. Medical corpsmen started moving down the line, checking the wounded. The Gefreiter with the head wound got bandaged. Actual bandages. White gauze. One of the corpsmen was Negro. Hartman could see him working on a Feldwebel's broken arm with the same quick competence the white medics showed. This was wrong. All of it. By every metric Hartman had been taught, every principle he'd absorbed through a decade of National Socialist indoctrination, this was impossible. The inferior races served the superior. The conquered suffered. The defeated got exactly what they'd earned through weakness. But the canteen didn't care about theory. Hartman thought about his training officer at Bad Tolz in 1938. Hauptmann Richter. "Hardness is strength," Richter had said. "Mercy is weakness. The Jew, the Slav, the mongrel American, they're soft. We're hard. That's why we'll win." Hartman looked at the American corporal, now helping a German private to his feet. The kid moved with easy strength, farm boy muscles. There was nothing soft about him, nothing weak. He'd just fought through the Bocage, some of the worst infantry country in Europe, and helped destroy an entire German division. Now he gave water to the survivors like it cost him nothing, because it didn't. That was the thing that made Hartman's brain stutter. The Americans had so much that sharing didn't diminish them. They were so strong that mercy wasn't weakness, it was proof they'd already won. The truck engines started. POWs were being loaded for transport to a collection center. Hartman got to his feet, legs cramping. The corporal with the canteen walked past, heading back toward American lines. He caught Hartman's eye, gave another nod, kept walking. 30 seconds. That's all it had taken. 30 seconds to unmake 6 years of carefully constructed certainty. Not with arguments, not with propaganda. With water and metal and the casual erasure of every line Hartman had been taught was permanent. He shuffled toward the truck with the others. His mouth still tasted of chemicals and metal. His mind tasted something it hadn't encountered in years. The possibility that everything he'd believed was wrong. Behind them, the American artillery kept firing. In front of them, the canteen-carrying corporal disappeared into the chaos of the forward area. Above them, the sun beat down on victors and vanquished alike, indifferent to the philosophy collapsing inside one German officer's skull. The truck jolted into motion. Hartman stared at his bound hands and wondered what kind of enemy wins by treating you like a human being. He would spend the next year trying to answer that question. The mess hall at Camp McCain stretched the length of a football field. Raw Mississippi pine, tar paper roof, screened windows that did nothing against the August heat. Gefreiter Otto Schneider stood in line with 60 other prisoners, watching steam rise from industrial vats of potatoes, smelling fresh bread for the first time in 8 months. The Russian front had made him an expert in hunger, not the missed meal kind, but the hollow-bone sort that turned men into animals. He'd watched Wehrmacht soldiers trade wedding rings for crusts. He'd guarded Soviet prisoners who ate grass, bark, anything. 700 calories a day, if they were lucky. Most weren't. The superior race ate first, ate best. The subhumans got what remained, which was usually nothing. The line moved forward. An American private, couldn't be more than 20, slapped a portion of mashed potatoes onto Schneider's tray. Real butter pooling yellow in the center. 2 pieces of actual chicken, skin still attached. Green beans. White bread, 2 slices. Coffee that smelled like coffee, not the burnt acorn substitute they'd had since '42. Next. Schneider moved to a table, set down his tray, looked at it like an equation that didn't balance. He'd seen American rations in captured supply dumps near Cannes. The sheer abundance had seemed like propaganda, too perfect to be real. But here it was, abundance as daily reality, served on scratched metal trays in a prisoner camp in Mississippi. 3 tables over, the American guards ate. Schneider could see their trays clearly. Same potatoes, same chicken, same bread, identical portions. The mess sergeant, Technical Sergeant Marcus Thompson, colored man, 3 stripes, sat with his men, eating from the same vat, drinking from the same coffee urn. This violated physics, the natural order. When Schneider's company guarded the cage at Bobruisk in 41, the hierarchy was absolute. Guards ate hot meals in the warmth while prisoners froze in the mud, with watery soup. Officers ate before enlisted. Aryans before Slavs. Human before Untermensch. Simple, logical, the way things had to be. But Sergeant Thompson ate the same chicken Schneider was eating, from the same kitchen, at the same temperature, while the German prisoners, enemies who'd killed Americans just weeks ago, received portions that would have been generous for Wehrmacht soldiers at the front. Schneider cut into the chicken, real meat, properly cooked, seasoned with something that tasted like pepper. He'd forgotten food could have flavor beyond burned or rotten. The potato was buttery, smooth, abundant. He ate slowly, methodically, unable to process what he was experiencing. His bunkmate, Werner, sat across from him, staring at his own tray. "They feed us better than we fed ourselves in France, before Normandy, I mean, when we were winning." "Don't talk." Schneider kept eating. If this was a trick, some test before punishment, he wanted a full stomach first. The guard walked past their table. Young private, maybe 19, with a Kentucky drawl. "Y'all need more coffee? Urn's still half full." Schneider looked up. The private wasn't mocking them, wasn't testing, just offering, like a waiter, like they were customers, not prisoners. Not even prisoners, just men who might want more coffee. "Thank you," Schneider managed in broken English. The private nodded and moved on. That evening, after the work detail, light duty, moving supplies in the warehouse where the temperature was bearable and water breaks came every hour, Schneider's dysentery hit. The Russian front had left him with intestinal damage that flared unpredictably. By 1900 hours, he was doubled over, sweating, stomach cramping with the familiar agony. The barracks guard, a corporal from Nebraska, took one look and called for the sergeant. Thompson appeared, assessed Schneider with experienced eyes, made a decision. "Get him to the infirmary, now." 2 guards helped Schneider across the compound. The infirmary smelled of disinfectant and clean cotton, smells he associated with officer hospitals, not prisoner camps. A medic, white coat over his uniform, examined him with the same methodical attention American medics had shown the wounded near St. Lo. "Dysentery? When did it start?" "Russia," Schneider said. 1941. The medic, couldn't be more than 25, just nodded and made notes. No judgment, no lecture about Untermensch diseases or genetic inferiority. Just, "We'll get you some sulfa, keep you hydrated, bland diet for a week." Same medicine they gave American soldiers, same doctor, same care. Schneider lay on the clean cot, actual sheets, actual mattress, and stared at the ceiling. In Bobruisk, when Soviet prisoners got dysentery, they were separated into a quarantine pen and left to either recover or die. Medical supplies were too valuable to waste on subhumans. He'd watched hundreds die that way, their bodies, stacked like cordwood until burial details could be arranged. But Sergeant Thompson had sent him to the infirmary, immediately, without hesitation, and this American medic treated him like a soldier, like someone worth medicine. Over the next 3 days, Schneider received sulfa tablets twice daily, clean water in unlimited quantities, and a bland diet of rice and broth that his system could tolerate. The medic checked on him each morning, tracking his recovery with clinical precision. On the 4th day, Schneider was cleared to return to the barracks. His fever had broken, his stomach had settled, his strength was returning. The medic signed his release form and handed it over. "You're good to go. Stick with light foods another week, drink plenty of water. You feel it coming back, report immediately. Don't wait." Schneider took the form. "Why?" The medic looked up from his clipboard, genuinely confused. "Why what?" "Why fix me? Why waste medicine? I am enemy. I am prisoner." The medic's face went through several expressions. Surprise, then something like pity, then simple matter-of-factness. "Son, you're a human being with dysentery. We fix dysentery. That's the job. That night, Schneider sat in the barracks with paper and pencil, both provided by the camp, along with limited postage for letters home. He wrote slowly, in careful German, trying to find words for the impossible. Mother. They waste more food in one meal than we saw in a month in Russia. The colored sergeant eats the same chicken we do. When I got sick, they gave me real medicine, American medicine, the same they give their soldiers. I have been in this camp 6 weeks and gained 4 kilograms. But that is not what haunts me. What haunts me is that they don't waste us. We are fed like soldiers, not like animals. When we are sick, they heal us. When we are thirsty, they give us clean water. The guards treat us like, I don't know the word, like future allies? Like humans who happen to be on the wrong side but won't be enemies forever? I commanded a guard detail at Bobruisk. I know what prison camps look like. I know what we did. And now I am in one, and the Americans do not do those things. They could. We are completely at their mercy. They have every right after what we did in Russia, in Poland, everywhere, but they don't. I don't understand what kind of enemy does this. I don't understand what it means that they can defeat us completely while still feeding us like it matters whether we live or die. The sergeant who got me to the doctor, he's a Negro. According to everything we were taught, he is doubly inferior, American and colored. But he sits at the same table as the white guards, eats the same food, wears the same stripes. And when I was sick, he helped me without thinking twice. I don't know what I believed anymore. I only know what I've seen. He folded the letter, addressed it carefully, left it for the morning mail collection. Through the barracks window, he could see Sergeant Thompson making his evening rounds, checking that the water barrels were full, that the latrines were functional, that the men had what they needed. The same sergeant who'd eaten the same chicken, who'd sent him for medicine, who treated German prisoners with the casual efficiency of someone managing soldiers, not subhumans. Schneider lay back on his bunk, thin but clean, with a blanket against the Mississippi night, and stared at the darkness. Somewhere in Russia, Soviet prisoners were dying in cages. Somewhere in Germany, the camps were doing things he'd heard whispered about but never seen. The hierarchy maintained through starvation, brutality, selection. But here, the hierarchy had collapsed. Same food, same medicine, same essential dignity. The Americans had won by being what Germany pretended to be, actually superior. Superior in the only way that ultimately mattered. They could afford to be kind because their victory was never in doubt. Schneider closed his eyes, tasting butter and chicken, feeling the sulfa working in his bloodstream, and knew he could never go back to believing what he'd believed. The canteen was first. The meal was confirmation. The master race starved its prisoners. The mongrelized Americans fed theirs. The equation didn't balance. Unless everything he'd been taught was wrong. The cold hit first. The kind that turned spit to ice before it landed. December in Mississippi. Hauptmann Werner Schultz stamped his feet against the frozen ground, breath fogging in the pre-dawn darkness. Another work detail. Another day of warehouse sorting or latrine duty, or whatever tasks the Americans invented to keep idle prisoners occupied. Except the guard corporal led them past the warehouses, past the mess hall, toward a building Schultz hadn't noticed before. New construction, the boards still pale, unstained by weather. Windows along the southern exposure. A hand-painted sign above the door in careful German, Bibliothek, library. Schultz stopped walking. The corporal gestured him forward with visible impatience, his breath a white cloud. "Come on, Hauptmann. Colonel wants this organized before Christmas." Inside, the smell hit like a memory he'd forgotten existed. Fresh wood, paper, ink, the scent of civilization, books, rows of them, stacked on the floor in neat piles beside empty shelves that still smelled of pine and varnish. Schultz knelt beside the nearest stack, fingers trembling as he lifted the top volume. Goethe. Faust, in German. He set it down carefully, picked up another, Schiller, Kant, Heine, Thomas Mann, Band at Home, available here. A technical manual on engineering. Sheet music for Beethoven's Ninth. A German-English dictionary, spine already cracked from use. Colonel Morrison requisitioned them from university libraries, the corporal said. He'd produced a clipboard from somewhere, consulting a list. You're supposed to help catalog them. Category, author, that system you crowds use. There's more coming. Requested some medical texts for your camp doctors. Schultz stared at the young American. 22, maybe. Farm-bred jaw, college vocabulary, the kind of mongrelized product that should have crumbled before German discipline. You build this. Not a question. MPs did most of it. I just helped with the shelves. The corporal shrugged. Colonel figured you boys might want something to read besides propaganda leaflets. Schultz commanded Stalag 319 near Chaum for 8 months in 1942. He knew what prison camps looked like. Barbed wire and brutality. Starvation rations calculated to the calorie for maximum labor with minimum expenditure. You didn't waste resources on enemy comfort. You certainly didn't educate them. But here stood American-built shelves, American-requisitioned books, an American corporal consulting a list of German-requested titles like a helpful librarian. The colonel asked what you wanted. Put out a survey last month. The corporal tapped his clipboard. Got back requests for everything from philosophy to car manuals. Even got you some music scores. Heard you boys have an orchestra going. They did. 15 instruments donated by local churches. The camp commander had authorized evening practice sessions in the rec hall. Schultz picked up another volume. Comparative Government Theory, in English. Advanced Reading for Graduate Students. This too? Why not? You planning to escape in an essay? The corporal's grin carried no malice, just the casual confidence of absolute victory. They could afford to educate prisoners because the outcome was never in doubt. The war was over in everything but the funeral rites. Schultz set the book down like it might detonate. In Poland, prisoners received no books, no entertainment, no music. The strong survived for labor. The weak disappeared into shallow graves outside the wire. That was the natural order. Conqueror and conquered. Superior and inferior. You didn't waste humanity on enemies. But Morrison treated this like rehabilitation, like investment, like these Germans might someday be colleagues instead of conquered subjects. The door opened. A private entered, stamping snow from his boots. First-generation German immigrant by his accent, helping 2 POWs maneuver another crate of books through the doorway. Morning, Hauptmann. Otto, Werner. Help me with these, would you? The prisoners responded to their first names, familiar and easy. The private spoke High German with them, laughing at some joke Schultz missed. No guard-prisoner formality, just men moving boxes. Private Fisher volunteers 3 evenings a week, the corporal explained. Tutors English, says it keeps his German sharp. He volunteers. Yeah, helps with the re-education program too, but mostly he just likes teaching. His dad was a professor before Fisher caught himself. Before they fled in 1938. Before the Reich made clear what happened to Jewish intellectuals. Fisher saw Schultz watching, smiled. No hatred in it, just weary recognition. You might find some familiar titles, Hauptmann. My father loved man. The books Fisher's father couldn't take when they ran, available here, in a prison camp, in Mississippi, for the enemies of the people who'd taken them in. Schultz's hands found the shelf brace without conscious thought, steadying himself. He'd killed people, given orders that resulted in deaths, administered a system that ground human beings into labor statistics and disposal problems. He'd done it efficiently, professionally, with the certainty that this was strength, that superiority meant domination, that kindness was weakness only inferior races indulged. But these Americans dominated completely. Overwhelming victory, total control, and their strength was that they didn't need to dehumanize to maintain it. They could afford to be kind. The recognition burned like frostbite warming. Hauptmann! The corporal waited, clipboard ready. Where do you want to start? fiction or technical? Schultz looked at the books. At Fischer patiently explaining English phonetics to Werner. At the empty shelves waiting to be filled with knowledge, with culture, with the civilization his people claimed to defend while burning its libraries. Philosophy, he said. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. Start with philosophy. They worked through the morning. Schultz catalogued while others shelved. The Americans had provided index cards, labels, even a small stamp with the camp designation. Professional, organized, respectful of the material. By noon, 3 shelves stood filled. Kant beside Hegel. Nietzsche, alphabetically placed despite the party's appropriation of his work. No censorship, no gaps where uncomfortable truths had been excised. Fischer appeared at Schultz's elbow during the lunch break, extending a thermos of coffee. Real coffee, American abundance. Your English is excellent, Hauptmann. University? Heidelberg. Philosophy and law. My father taught at Frankfurt. Philosophy. Fischer's smile carried old grief, weathered smooth. He would have loved this. Would have. Past tense, the Reich's gift to the world. Schultz accepted the coffee, drank from the same thermos Fischer had used. Another canteen, another casual erasure of the lines the Reich drew in blood. They're winning, Schultz said quietly. The war? Fischer's eyebrow lifted. Already won, Hauptmann. Not just the war. Schultz gestured at the shelves. This. They're planning for peace while still fighting. Planning for us to be people again. Fischer considered that, nodded slowly. Colonel Morrison lost a son at Omaha Beach. Still approved the book request. Still treats you like you might become allies someday. He paused. Maybe that's what winning actually looks like. That night, Schultz lay in his bunk staring at the barracks ceiling. Around him, men slept with full stomachs, warm blankets, medical care when needed. The orchestra practiced Brahms in the distance, allowed their instruments, their music, their culture. He thought about the library. About Americans building it while fighting a two-front war. About Fischer volunteering his evenings. About Morrison planning for German rehabilitation while American boys died on German bullets. What do you do with an enemy like that? An enemy who defeats you on the battlefield then hands you Goethe, who could crush you utterly but chooses to educate you instead. Schultz had believed in strength through domination, in the natural hierarchy of races, in the necessity of brutality. He'd administered those beliefs with bureaucratic efficiency, convinced that hardness was superiority, but he'd confused cruelty for strength. The Americans demonstrated strength so complete it could afford mercy, victory so certain it could plan for peace, superiority so genuine it didn't need to dehumanize to prove itself. They'd already won, not because of tanks or planes, though God, they had enough of those, but because they believed Germans were worth saving, worth educating, worth rehabilitating into the world they were building from the Reich's ashes, fighting with one hand, building the future with the other. In the morning, Schultz returned to the library, shelved more books, learned more English from Fischer's patient tutoring, began to understand that the real weapon wasn't the Sherman tanks that crushed the Wehrmacht. It was the library built for the enemy. The canteen shared without hesitation. The radical idea that your enemy's humanity survived your conflict with him. Schultz picked up another volume, Man's the Magic Mountain, and found his place on the shelf. The April sun hung low over Camp Butner, North Carolina, turning the pine forest beyond the wire into black silhouettes against burning orange sky. Unteroffizier Franz Müller drove the post into red clay soil, his shoulders aching from 8 hours of fence repair. The mallet's rhythm matched his pulse, solid, mechanical, keeping thoughts at bay. The American guard leaned against a truck bed, watching the work detail finish. Corporal Hayes, maybe 22, with Oklahoma dust still in his accent and a Purple Heart ribbon on his jacket. He'd lost the easy posture back in January, after the mail call that turned his face to stone. Now he carried himself differently. Weight that wasn't physical. Muller knew that weight. He'd carried it since the telegram about Hans arrived in February 1943. His brother frozen into the Stalingrad mud, another statistic in the Sixth Army's destruction. 23 years old. Dead because someone decided a city's name mattered more than 100,000 lives. That'll do. Hayes pushed off the truck, pulling a pack of Lucky Strikes from his breast pocket. He tapped one out, lit it with a Zippo that caught on the first strike. Then he extended the pack toward Mueller. Mueller's hands stayed on the post-hole digger. 5 other Germans on the detail had gone still, watching. "Take one." Hayes shook the pack. "Day's done." Franz accepted the cigarette with fingers that had gripped Soviet throats in 41, built pontoon bridges across the Don in 42, surrendered in the Ardennes in December. Hayes lit it for him. Real tobacco, not the sawdust mixture they'd smoked in the last months before capture. The taste hit his lungs like civilization itself. Hayes took a drag from his own cigarette, eyes on the sunset. "Hell of a sky." "Yes." Muller's English carried thick consonants. "Very. Schön. Beautiful." They stood 3 feet apart, enemy soldiers sharing tobacco while the day died. Muller thought about the Soviet prisoners his brother's unit had guarded outside Kharkov in the winter of 41. He remembered Hans's letters, clinical descriptions of frostbite, dysentery, the morning counts that grew smaller each week. No cigarettes, no sunset conversations, no acknowledgement that the creatures behind the wire had once been men. Hans had written, "You stop seeing them as people. Easier that way. They're numbers, work units. When they fall, you replace them. Thinking of them as human makes you weak." Muller had believed him. Had to believe him because Hans was his brother and brothers don't become monsters. The alternative, that the uniform transformed good men into executioners, was unbearable. Hayes reached into the truck bed, pulled out 2 Coca-Colas, popped the caps on the bumper edge with practiced motion, handed one to Mueller. "Don't tell the lieutenant." Hayes smiled without humor. "Supposed to drink these ourselves." The bottle sweated in Mueller's palm. Through the brown glass he could see Hayes's profile, jaw tight, eyes distant. The Purple Heart wasn't for decoration. This boy had bled somewhere. France, maybe, or Belgium during the offensive that ended with Muller's surrender. "Your brother?" Muller said. The words came before thought. Hayes went rigid. "What?" "January, the mail. I see your face change." Muller gestured vaguely at his own expression. "I know this face. I have this face. My brother, Stalingrad. February last year." The sunset deepened to crimson. Hayes took a long pull from his cigarette. "Hurtgen Forest," he finally said. "November. Shrapnel through the chest." He touched his own ribs. Medics said he might have made it if they'd gotten him out faster. But the mud, the trees, He stopped. Shook his head. "Tommy was 19. 19. Hans had been 23. Neither age mattered. Both numbers too small for the mathematics of death. "I am sorry," Mueller said. Hayes looked at him then. Really looked. Not at a prisoner or an enemy or a German, but at Franz Mueller, who had a brother who died in snow, while Hayes's brother died in mud, and both of them stood here smoking American cigarettes under an American sunset, because someone had decided borders mattered more then. Brothers. "Yeah." Hayes's voice came out rough. "Me too." They drank the Coca-Colas. Mueller had never tasted anything like it. Sweet and sharp and cold. The carbonation burning his throat. Behind them, the other prisoners spoke in low German, confusion threading their words. Grundler whispered something about fraternization, about how the Americans would punish this, but no one moved. No one interfered. "You know what gets me?" Hayes stared into his bottle. Tommy died killing Germans. Good at it, too. Made corporal after the Siegfried Line. His letters talked about it like a job. 27 confirmed, he said. Proud of it. He glanced at Mueller. "Maybe one of them knew your brother." "Maybe." Mueller's throat closed. "The world is very small for killing. But big enough we can stand here drinking Coke and nobody stops us." Hayes finished his cigarette, ground it under his boot. "That's the part that makes my head hurt." A whistle blew from the guard tower. End of work detail. Time to load up, return to barracks, eat the evening meal that would be, Muller knew from 8 weeks at Butner, identical to what Hayes ate in his own mess hall. Same meatloaf, same potatoes, same portions. The other prisoners climbed into the truck bed. Muller started to follow, but Hayes caught his arm. "Your brother," Hayes said quietly. "Stalingrad. He suffer long?" The letter said quick, shrapnel. Muller's eyes burned. "I do not know if this is true. They say this to families." "Tommy's lieutenant said the same thing." Hayes released his arm. "Said he went fast, didn't feel it. But I was there in November before I got rotated out. I saw what tree bursts do. Wasn't fast." They stood in the truth of it. The lie families needed and soldiers couldn't escape. "I hated you," Hayes said. "Every German, every one. Wanted you all dead for Tommy." He pulled out another Lucky Strike, didn't light it, just held it. "Then they put me on guard duty here, and you're just guys. Tired guys who miss home and talk about brothers who died." He met Muller's eyes. "How the hell am I supposed to keep hating when you bleed the same?" Mueller had no answer. In 1941, outside Kharkov, his unit had executed 16 Soviet partisans. He'd helped dig the graves. Told himself they were different. Untermenschen, subhuman, the enemy. When their bodies fell into the trench, he'd felt nothing. Nothing. Now he stood holding a Coca-Cola bottle, smoking an American cigarette, mourning a brother, with a man whose brother he might have killed by proxy if the mathematics of war connected those dots, and he felt everything. "We were told we are the master race," Muller said, "that to be strong is to be hard, that mercy is weakness." He looked at his cigarette's glowing tip. "But you are winning everywhere. Your armies, your planes, your ships. And you give cigarettes to enemies. You feed us like soldiers. You—" The words lodged in his throat. "You do not need to hate us to defeat us. This is real strength. We needed hate because we were afraid." Hayes lit a cigarette with the Zippo. Click, flame, snap. "My CO says that's what makes us American. We can win without becoming what we fight." He exhaled smoke. "I don't know if I believe that. Most days I still want you dead for Tommy. But then we do this." He gestured between them. "And maybe he's right." The truck engine coughed to life. Sergeant Morrison shouted something about moving out. Hayes stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself. "Get loaded up, Mueller." Franz climbed into the truck bed. As they pulled away, he watched Hayes standing alone in the dusk, cigarette smoke rising into purple sky. A boy soldier mourning his brother while guarding the men who killed him, somehow finding the strength to share tobacco anyway. That night in the barracks, while others played chess or read letters from home, Mueller wrote in his journal, the one the Americans permitted, another impossibility. They have won, not because their bombs fall thicker or their tanks drive faster. They have won because they can afford to be human. We told ourselves that cruelty was strength, that domination proved superiority. But these Americans dominate us completely without needing to strip our humanity to justify it. They are strong enough to share cigarettes, to mourn brothers together, to see enemies as men who might someday be allies. We pretended to be the master race, but they are actually superior, in the only way that ever mattered. Hans died believing hardness was virtue. He was wrong. The Americans prove it every day by being what we only pretended, truly strong enough to be kind. Outside, the North Carolina night filled with spring sounds, frogs, crickets, wind through pines. Somewhere beyond the wire, Hayes probably sat in his barracks holding his brother's last letter, wrestling with the same impossible equations. How to hate when the enemy grieves. How to kill when the enemy bleeds the same. How to win without losing yourself. The Americans had solved it somehow. Mueller felt it in every shared canteen, every equal meal, every unguarded moment of mercy. They'd found the answer his brother never could. The cigarette's taste lingered on his tongue. American tobacco mixed with the bitter ash of a worldview collapsing into truth. The auditorium at Fort Benning smelled of furniture polish and August humidity. Klaus Hartmann, Dr. Hartmann now, 62 years old, Wire-rimmed glasses perched on a nose that had been broken twice during the war, stood at the podium adjusting the microphone. His wife Anna sat in the front row, her hand resting on her purse. Behind her, perhaps 200 people filled the folding chairs. Army officers in Class A uniforms, veterans in sport coats with their war medals pinned to lapels, a scattering of civilian academics like himself. Beside him at the head table sat Colonel Morrison. 83 years old. Now, liver-spotted hands steady on the table edge. The same man who'd commanded Camp McCain in Mississippi 41 years ago. The same man who'd ordered the library built, who'd authorized the book requests, who'd treated enemy prisoners like they might someday matter. Hartman's prepared remarks sat before him, 3 typed pages, double-spaced, footnoted like the academic paper it resembled. He'd worked on them for weeks, showed them to Anna, to his department chair, to his American colleagues at the conference in Atlanta where he'd been keynote speaker. He looked at those pages now and set them aside. "I want to tell you about a canteen," he said. The room quieted. Morrison leaned forward slightly, one eyebrow raised. July 1944. A field outside St. Lo. I had been captured that morning, my unit overrun, 12 hours of fighting, then surrender. 40 of us sat in the dirt, hands bound, very thirsty. It was quite hot. His English carried a German precision, each word selected carefully. Anna smiled at him. "Keep going." An American soldier approached us, military police. He was perhaps 19 years old. I remember thinking he looked like a farmer's son. Broad shoulders, sunburned neck. He carried a canteen, standard issue, metal, dented on one side. Hartman's hands gripped the podium edges. He offered it to the first prisoner. This man, I did not know his name, hesitated. We all hesitated. We knew what happened to prisoners. I myself had served on the Russian front. I had seen... Well, we knew. The silence in the auditorium pressed against his eardrums. But this American boy, he just stood there, waiting, patient. Finally, the prisoner drank, handed the canteen back, and then... Hartman paused, the memory as vivid now as it had been 4 decades ago. The American put the canteen to his own lips. Same canteen, same water. He drank from it. No hesitation, no disgust, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Morrison nodded slowly, recognition in his weathered face. He did this with every man, 40 prisoners. Each one drank. Each time, he drank after them. When he reached me, I took that canteen and I understood something fundamental had broken. Not the Wehrmacht, that was already broken, but the entire worldview I had been taught since 1938, since the Anschluss, since the propaganda films and the youth rallies and the ideology that said there were superior races and inferior races, that said strength required brutality, that said enemies were Untermensch, subhuman. He straightened his glasses. One 19-year-old farm boy with a dented canteen destroyed all of that in 30 seconds. Someone in the back coughed. Chairs creaked. Later, I was sent to Camp McCain, Mississippi, Colonel Morrison's command. Hartman gestured to the old man beside him. Morrison raised one hand in slight acknowledgement. There I watched Negro sergeants eat the same meals as white guards. I saw prisoners receive medical care identical to American soldiers. I used a library. His voice caught slightly. A library that shouldn't have existed. Books in German, philosophy, history, sheet music. The Americans built this, asked us what we wanted to read, gave us education while fighting a war against us. He looked directly at Morrison now. I commanded men for 6 years. Poland, France, Russia. I thought I understood what strength meant. I thought hardness was strength. I thought domination proved superiority. But you taught me something different, Colonel. You showed me that real strength is the ability to be kind when you have the power to be cruel. That true superiority is not needing to dehumanize your enemy to defeat him. Morrison's eyes glistened, but his expression remained steady. My friend Otto Schneider, Some of you may know him. He spoke at the conference in Atlanta 2 years ago. Otto wrote to his mother in 1944 from Camp McCain. He said, "They feed us like soldiers, not animals. I don't understand what kind of enemy does this." That letter, Colonel, that letter was the beginning of his transformation. He is now a peace activist in Hamburg. He brings children to schools and talks about reconciliation. Hartman turned to address the broader audience. Franz Muller, captured in the Bulge, was given a cigarette by his guard at Camp Butner. They smoked together and talked about their brothers, both dead, one at Stalingrad, one in Hürtgen Forest. Franz emigrated to America in 1952. He raised 3 children in Georgia. All served in the United States military. A colonel in the second row, Morrison's son, Hartman knew, also Army, also a veteran, leaned forward, listening intently. "We were defeated by your industry, yes. Your tanks, your airplanes, your magnificent logistics. But you won us, truly won us, with sandwiches and libraries and the radical idea that your enemy's humanity survived your conflict with him. You did not need to become what you fought against. You defeated Nazism by proving it false, not by becoming better Nazis." He picked up the prepared remarks, held them for a moment, then set them down again. "I teach political science now at Heidelberg. Democratic theory, constitutional law. I tell my students about that canteen, about the sergeant who saved Otto's life when he had dysentery, about Colonel Morrison who lost his son in the war but still built us a library. I tell them these stories because they explain something no textbook can. Why Germany and America are now allies. Why former enemies became friends." Morrison stood slowly, joints protesting, extended his hand. Hartman took it, the same grip, the same firmness he remembered from 1946 when the colonel had shaken each prisoner's hand before repatriation. "You gave us democracy by example," Hartman said, voice thick. "Not through lectures, through how you treated us when we were powerless, through small acts multiplied across 400 camps and 300,000 prisoners. You sent us home as evangelists for the very system we'd tried to destroy." They held the handshake. The audience stood, applause building. Morrison's son approached the podium, same uniform his father once wore, same bearing. He extended his hand to Hartman. The German professor took it without hesitation. The son's grip was firm, respectful, no different than how he might greet an American colleague. "Thank you for coming, Dr. Hartman," Morrison's son said. "My father's talked about Camp McCain my whole life, about the library, about men like you who made it matter." The plaque waited on its easel, draped in cloth. Morrison pulled the covering away. Bronze, mounted on wood, engraved simply, "In honor of the German POW program, 1943 to 1946. Where enemies became allies through the power of humanity." Hartman touched the edge of the plaque, fingers tracing the words. He thought of that field in Normandy, 41 years ago. 41 years of teaching, of advocacy, of bringing German students to America and American students to Germany. 41 years of proving that the Canteens lesson was real. "We prepared for everything," he said quietly, repeating words a captured colonel had once told American interrogators. "Your tanks, your planes, your ships. We never prepared for your trucks. But more than that, we never prepared for your mercy. That was the weapon we couldn't defend against." Morrison clapped him on the shoulder. The old man's hand was still strong. "You did the hard part, Klaus," Morrison said. "You went home and built something better." Outside, the Georgia sun blazed. Hartman and Anna walked to their rental car, Morrison's family behind them making small talk about dinner plans. Someone suggested barbecue. Morrison's grandson, maybe 16, asked intelligent questions about post-war reconstruction. Anna squeezed Klaus's hand. "You didn't use your notes," she said. "I didn't need them," he replied. "Some stories don't need footnotes." The plaque would hang in Fort Benning's museum. Veterans would bring grandchildren to see it. Historians would reference it. But Hartman knew the real memorial wasn't bronze on wood. It was Otto teaching peace in Hamburg. Franz's children serving in American uniforms. Werner Schultz, dead now 5 years, who'd spent 3 decades teaching POW rights law. It was the memory of a farm boy who shared his water. The weapon that won wasn't industrial capacity or firepower. It was the radical idea that your enemy's humanity survived your conflict with him. And that weapon, Hartman knew, touching the car door handle in the Georgia heat, that weapon had proven more enduring than any tank, any bomb, any fortress. It had transformed enemies into the men now shaking hands in a Fort Benning parking lot, making dinner plans, building the peace their younger selves had tried to destroy. The Canteens lesson lived on.